I think a second Trump term would do enormous damage. The withdrawal from NATO alone would be a catastrophe and not repairable.
He looks, Ambassador, like an unstoppable force when it comes to becoming the Republican candidate, doesn't he?
Well, if you had to bet today that he would be the nominee, I think that would be a pretty safe bet, but it's not certain. And Chris Christie's withdrawal opens the possibility that either Nikki Haley or still Ron DeSantis have a chance to beat him. My own view is that really only about 30 or 35% of the Republican Party supports Trump. His backing has increased because of these court cases. People think that they're brought unfairly. You can argue about that, but Trump has a way of taking what for any other politician would be a disqualifying event and turning it to his advantage.
So I suppose, in theory, a possible challenge to Trump's dominance if Republicans who don't want Trump rally behind another single candidate, which brings us to the subject of Nikki Haley, of course, who is backed by a lot of Republicans who don't want Donald Trump. And she can expect a massive onslaught from the pro-Trump MAGA crowd now, can't she?
She will, and really, it's already started. The question whether she is the most viable candidate against Trump is answered almost by default because only DeSantis really is available as an alternative. I think I can say I speak for a lot of people who don't want to see Trump as the nominee, that we would support a cardboard cutout over Donald Trump. Because I do think for the good of the country, the good of the Republican Party, the best outcome is that Trump is eliminated from American politics by his inability to get the Republican nomination. As I've said a moment ago, that's very difficult, but that's still the way I would prefer to see this end.
Right. I do want to come to questions of concern, not just to America, but to the West, to the free world, and that's not overstating it. I know that you had been considering running yourself. Have you declared that you're not going to declare?
No, I haven't. I haven't. But look at the calendar; it's pretty well over, and I'm certainly not going to run for president as an independent. The reason I was considering it, though, I think remains a serious issue for the country, and that is the debate over national security. The Democratic Party doesn't have a real national security wing anymore. There is no Dean Acheson, Scoop Jackson wing of the Democratic Party. So if the isolationism that Donald Trump has promoted, he's not the only cause of it spreading within the Republican Party, but he's a major reason. If the isolationists were to prevail within the Republican Party, there wouldn't be anybody in the United States really advocating for a Ronald Reagan kind of peace through strength approach.
Well, let's then look at those questions of security, not just American, but Western security, the free world. There's a story today here in the UK media and elsewhere that a European commissioner has now told the European Parliament, it's an account dating back to 2020, and in that account, Donald Trump is said to have told the president of the European Commission that America would not be there for Europe if Europe was attacked, and that he wanted out of NATO. How seriously do you think that kind of talk, that kind of threat should be taken?
Well, I was not there. Obviously, I had left the administration by then, but I believe the story. I'm sure it's true. It reflects what Trump said when I was still national security advisor. I write about it in my book at the 2018 NATO summit in Brussels, where he was within an inch of announcing the U.S. would withdraw from NATO. And although his current campaign posture is that he wants an intensive review of the value of NATO, there's no doubt in my mind he would withdraw if he were elected president. It's a very, very serious matter, and that's one reason why I think in the American presidential debate we need more talk about this, because the implications once a president starts that process of withdrawal are enormous.
And of course, were that to happen, it would leave an enormous vacuum in Western security and in NATO, of which America is an absolutely central pillar. Now, I don't know to what extent you focused on how NATO and how Europe should prepare for such an eventuality, but what should NATO and Europe be thinking of about what might be done?
Well, I don't think much can be done, frankly, if the U.S. did withdraw. You know, the Congress has passed a statute saying that no president can withdraw from NATO without approval by both houses of Congress. That statute is almost certainly unconstitutional. I have participated in getting the United States out of a number of treaties that were not in our interest. The president does it on his own. It's not like the advise and consent power to ratify a treaty question of withdrawals for a president. So if that happens, I think NATO's finished. And I don't know what the Europeans would do, but it would be done without U.S. participation. And it would harm the United States around the world because our bilateral allies, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and others, would say, well, if the United States is withdrawing from the alliance it created and led for 75 plus years, the most successful political military alliance, I would say, in history, they're certainly not going to pay much attention to us. And I'm
Mm.
afraid they would be right.
Yeah, well, it would certainly require a very rapid and very, very large scale rethink on the part of European defence partners on how to fill the gap and still maintain security at its present level. And then there's Ukraine, of course, where Donald Trump has spoken about ending that war in 24 hours. However implausible that might be, they will be surely worried in Kyiv and around Europe. It would mean arguably the end of Ukraine's hopes of resisting the war.
Well, I think it would. I think there would be champagne corks popping in the Kremlin and in Beijing and a number of other places if that were to happen. And look, what Trump has said about resolving this by getting Zelensky and Putin into a room and coming up with a solution in 24 hours is, of course, complete nonsense. It would fail. We know that failure would not be Donald Trump's part, and he will be quick to tell us he's
Yes.
not responsible for it. So the question would be who he would blame. And if I were Putin, having sized Trump up during his first term, I would be pretty confident that Trump would blame Zelensky.
Indeed. Now, I mean, a bit of this that I've struggled with of late is the fact that, and you've alluded to this, the Republican Party in America, rather like the Conservative Party in this country, have got a tradition of being very strong on security, national security, and on defence. And here you say that strain of thinking is almost extinct in the Republican Party. How did that happen?
Well, I don't think it's almost extinct. Actually, I think in the Senate, for example, the overwhelming majority of Republicans, I would say 43, 44 out of 49, are still Reaganite conservatives. And in the House, I think it's the Trump intimidation effect. I don't think people have really changed their views. I wish I could say there were more profiles and courage, but I'm actually encouraged. It's only fear of political consequences, not a change in policy. If we had a responsible Republican presidential nominee who believed in supporting Ukraine and defending against the Russian aggression, I think these Republicans would fall into line. And I think you would see it would be the left wing of the Democratic Party taking Russia's side and saying this thing ought to go to negotiation. So I don't consider this a permanent transformation of American politics. I consider it part of the Trump aberration effect, which I'm and many others are working to minimize and ultimately correct.
Again, that's an interesting view. I mean, Donald Trump has told us, I think, just in the last 24 hours, he's decided who he wants as his running mate on the joint ticket to be his vice president. He's not shared who that person might be. Now, I know you're concerned to see Donald Trump off. You say you'd rather have a cardboard cutout. But who do you think might be that running mate?
Well, I think that statement may have been true at the moment Trump said it. It may even still be true as we're speaking, but it's no guarantee it will be true by tomorrow. So, there a lot of people are being speculated about. I think it would be a mistake for any Republican who hopes to lead a responsible party in the future to take that vice presidency. It's one of the issues Chris Christie raised about Nikki Haley before he dropped out. Both Christie and Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, had said they would not, under any circumstances, be Trump's vice president. Of course, they said we expect to be the nominee, so that question is hypothetical.
Mm.
But Nikki Haley has dodged the question. She's simply saying she expects to win. Well, they all expect to win.
Yeah.
But in that case, there's no harm in answering the hypothetical and saying, I will
Mm.
not be Trump's VP.
Mm.
So I'm worried about it because I think it would give Trump legitimacy and going into what I think all believe will be a close election in November.
Yes.
That's help he doesn't need.
Do you believe, just lastly, do you believe that democracy is itself in peril in America on this election?
I do not. And I think it's a mistake to overstate what the Trump threat is. I think a second Trump term would do enormous damage. The withdrawal from NATO alone would be a catastrophe and not repairable. But the idea that one person, Donald Trump or anybody else, can overturn the Constitution, our institutions, the views of of the American people, I think exaggerates the nature of the threat. I'm not trying to downplay it. I'm simply saying you have to try and assess it accurately, not to overstate it and not to understate it.
Mm.
You know, the Roman Republic didn't fall just because of Julius Caesar. And by the way, Donald Trump is no Julius Caesar, but there was Sulla and there was Catiline and there were Pompey all before Caesar. One person is not going to destroy the Constitution.